So this movie here has a lot of cast members, a lot of people that we've talked about on previous movies.
That's right, quite a few. Elijah Cook obviously jumps out as somebody I just recently spoke about in Rosemary's Baby, and he's teamed here with an actress who he actually was in Stanley Kubrick's movie The Killing. She plays the landlord in the house that Ben Mears is staying in, and he's like a drunk or a local wino or something.
Right, yeah.
They have one scene where he comes into Mears' apartment, and she catches him reading Ben Mears' stories that he's writing. Her name is Marie Windsor. So they were a team in The Killing, and I guess Toby Hooper. Is it Toby Hooper or Tobe Hooper? I should have checked that. I guess
I
it's
always say Toby Hooper, but
yeah, I guess that's it. He apparently was a Kubrick fan, so he thought that would be a little amusing thing to have the two of them back together again in this movie. Also, Ed Flanders, who we've spoken about on a couple of occasions.
from
I
The
know
Exorcist.
you're a fan of The Exorcist 3. I actually had just seen him in an episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I was watching old episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. He played a priest who is thinking of leaving the priesthood, and Mary thinks it's because of her. And as in that episode and in this movie and in just about everything that Ed Flanders ever did, he's almost always the best actor in the
Right,
movie.
yeah.
He's the only one giving a believable, low-key, performance, and he's doing that again here. Who else? Lou Ayres. Lou Ayres is another guy who was in an episode of Mary Tyler Moore. Neither one of them, I don't think Ed Flanders or Lou Ayres ever did a Columbo episode, so we can't check that box. But Lou Ayres was apparently a big movie star, I guess back in the 40s, or maybe earlier than that. He was like a matinee idol. And here he's playing the character, I guess the character's supposed to be a school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that's rehearsing Mark Petrie, the kid, as he does his like a historical play,
yeah.
right, about Jerusalem's Lot, which is the full name of the town, and it's the local people call it Salem's Lot with an apostrophe. They've removed the apostrophe from the title in this case, and they just have everybody referring to it as Salem's Lot. But actually, in that little speech that Mark Petrie gives, he mentions that it was originally called Jerusalem's Lot. Mark Petrie is played by Lance Kerwin, who was all around on television back at that time. He had just, I think his show, James at 15, I think, was it James at 15 or James at 16? I forget. It only lasted like 10 episodes before it was canceled. But that was well received critically. It just didn't find an audience. It was about a kid growing up, going through all the, problems that kids go through.
Right.
Um,
Jeffrey Lewis was
right. Next to Ed Flanders, I think Jeffrey Lewis probably acquits himself very well in this. Probably one of the best performances. The scene where he shows up at Lou Ayres, actually where is he? He's at, I forget how the sequence of events. Lou Ayres goes to Ben Mears' place and he finds that guy sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
His vampiric form, or he's in his own. I forget what the actual sequence.
He's at the teacher's house.
He's at the teacher's house. Okay, so yes, that would make sense because then he succumbs to a heart attack. There'll be spoilers all through this.
Yeah. Just in case nobody's seen this movie.
But that's one of the few scenes in the movie that I thought was genuinely scary. If there's anything in it. I know this is a very well regarded movie by some people. I have a feeling that probably what it is that a lot of folks saw this when they were kids.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Where I saw it when I was a kid, and probably the first time, as far as I can remember, the first time seeing child death on screen, and you're too young to have dealt with it, so it's kind of weird to see, like, murdered kids or whatever.
Right. that was a standards and practices thing back at that time. The networks didn't want to show children in peril.
Right.
They broke that rule all the time, it seems to me, especially as Stephen King pointed out in the afternoon soap operas, where just a few years earlier they had little David Collins running away from Barnabas Collins and from ghosts and every other conceivable type of peril. But this is another film where we have that character, just similar to the character that we were talking about in Phantasm, the adolescent boy who discovers some secret and something that nobody will believe
Believe,
is
yeah.
going. He's the only one that knows. In this case, they have this character Mark Petrie, who is supposedly like a monster kid. He has all
Right,
the
yeah.
Aurora models. I should have had my Aurora models here
So, yeah.
as a visual aid. I don't know how I forgot that, but I would have preferred if they had focused on either him as the main character or David Soul as the main character.
Yeah, it would seem kind of like when you're watching, you're like, okay, they're going to team up or something, but it wasn't until like the very end of the film. You're
Takes
just
a
like,
long time,
yeah.
and it's not really a sort of gradual teaming up that you would expect, where little by little they're putting the pieces together and it just naturally brings them together. It seems very abrupt, like they're
Abrupt, yeah.
completely apart for most of the thing, and then eventually they end up as a team. But the Mark Petrie character really isn't. Well, I would say this about all the characters in the movie. The director and the producer talked a lot about the subtleties of characterization that they were going for. To be honest with you, I don't see it. The
Right.
characters are paper thin, really. They're sort of stock characters for the most part. So the
And
character
a
of
lot
Mark,
of, I guess they used them for a lot of filler, just
well, that's the
because
other criticism.
you have the real estate agent and his affair with the guy's wife. I'm like, did we need that really
Well,
in
no,
this
it's
movie?
the way they played it out. It's completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
In the original book, that pays off in the end. It ties in with the vampire
Okay.
concept. But in this case, he takes his wife and he leaves. So
Yeah.
that you say, so well, what's the point of that? Right? That whole sequence in the first episode is really completely irrelevant to the story that they're trying to tell. And rather than developing the Mark Petrie character, they have instead that, which is, again, it may be one of those instances where it's something that shouldn't be in there, but actually is one of the more interesting moments in the film, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to turn away when you see somebody with a shotgun pointed at them, right? There's a moment of tension and suspense there that's undeniable. But that whole sequence shouldn't have been in the movie. We shouldn't have found out so much about Fred Willard's character. He's not an important character. Him having an affair with the girl that works in the office and her husband or boyfriend, all that stuff is irrelevant. All the stuff about the guy who is angry because Ben Mears is taking his girl away, all that
Yeah.
stuff is
Yeah,
irrelevant.
it doesn't. Yeah, you didn't need it either. Speaking of the Susan character, Bonnie Bedelia. Every time I see her, I'm like, I know this woman, and I
Yeah,
never can figure out where she's at until I look it up and realize that she played Bruce Willis's wife in Die Hard.
right. That's
That's
right.
where,
Yes.
and I'm like, okay, that's where I know her from.
And the other woman, uh, uh, who plays Mark's mother, she was on a couple episodes of Star Trek.
Yeah.
So just about everybody in this movie is somebody we've seen before. Obviously, Fred Willard was Fahrenheit Tonight and all those movies that what's his name did those mockumentary things like This is Spinal Tap.
Oh
Who's
yeah.
the guy that does those movies? I forget his name. Uh,
I knew until you asked me.
yeah, I don't know.
No, I can't think of it.
Yes, but anyway, he's been in a lot of those, and Kenneth McMillan, who plays Constable Parkins Gillespie, he's sort of fat-faced Irish guy who's been in a lot of movies. He's usually playing, corrupt police officers and stuff like that. His name in this is Constable Parkins Gillespie, which, as I mentioned, Gillespie is the name of the character, the sheriff that Rod Steiger plays in the Heat of the Night.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This TV show, Salem's Lot, was produced by Sterling Silliphant and won an Oscar for writing the screenplay for In the Heat of the Night. So presumably that's their little tribute. He gets to he gets to wear the sunglasses and do the whole,
Yeah.
small town sheriff thing.
Yeah, I thought
Uh,
I'd recognize the Bonnie Bartlett actress. I thought I recognized her from a couple of episodes of Law and Order, but I don't think it's the same woman because I couldn't find her listed anywhere.
well, I
Even though
don't.
even though the George can't pronounce his last name, Zundaza, I guess he was actually in Law and Order too.
Well, I guess most of these people are probably the
TV,
veterans of
yeah.
TV. Yeah. Uh, Reggie Nalder is somebody that did a lot of movies over the years, including Mark of the Devil and Hitchcock's Man Who Knew Too Much. But crazy people that we are, we would probably know him best as that alien ambassador in Journey to Babel, the Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
The guy that has the little uh, recording device or something in his antenna
But
that
yeah.
gets broken off. He's an interesting figure because uh, he had the lower third of his face very seriously scarred. I don't know if that was a result of something that happened in the war. I don't know the details on it. I don't even know if he's ever discussed it. But he's a very unusual looking fellow. And I guess here Toby Hooper wanted to have a Nosferatu like, Max Schreck like vampire.
Yeah.
And apparently immediately thought of Reggie Nalder. Reggie Nalder apparently wasn't crazy about all that makeup that he had to wear. But in any case, it's a memorable image. I think the problem with this, on a couple, there's a couple of problems with the script on this. Apparently, they had a lot of people that worked on the script. Larry Cohen, who would end up writing and directing a pretty lousy sequel to this, he was one of the folks who contributed a version of the screenplay. He wrote a version. Sterling Silliphant wrote a version. Might have been some other people that wrote versions of it. And eventually, Paul Menashe, I think his name is the guy that got sole credit. Larry Cohen apparently filed for an arbitration from the Writers Guild because he felt he should get some credit. But the producer says actually that that Larry Cohen's script was pretty lousy. So uh, he didn't get the credit eventually. It all went to Paul Menashe, if that's the right way you pronounce his name. And I think that maybe having all the different people contributing to the script made it into a sort of a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
We already mentioned the scenes that really shouldn't be in there. They're wasting valuable screen time. I know they have a lot of time to fill, but all that time they were wasting with the real estate agent and his affair with the other guy's wife, and all that stuff that wasn't necessary, and all the business of the guy who's jealous of Ben Mears going with his ex-girlfriend and punching him and putting him in the hospital. All that stuff could have instead been devoted to fleshing out some of the characters that we're really interested in.
Yeah.
This, right? David Soul is not bad in this, but I don't think he's really right for this type of character. I mean, he really comes across as being a little too a little too Hollywood,
Yeah.
and not so much like a kind of how would we describe it? Well, I'm trying to think of a nice way to describe Stephen King, because
Yeah.
that's basically what this guy should be like, right? I mean, Stephen King was really writing about himself. David Soul obviously is nothing like Stephen King,
Yeah.
but he's passable. It's just that they needed to develop the story, develop his character a little more, because he ends up sort of spouting this cliche melodramatic dialogue that sounds too corny, frankly,
Yeah.
for something that's trying to achieve a level of realism to make this story. And one of the things about Stephen King's novels that make them so effective is you almost feel like a friend is telling you their own personal experiences, right? It has that sort of, I heard this from a friend, believability. And Stephen King, even though he was writing, obviously, this came out in '75, the novel, he writes almost like a blogger would nowadays,
Yeah.
and the inclusion of all the details, all the mentions of geographical points of interest and the different brands of different things, the type of car, the type of motorcycle, the types of beer, whatever the characters are doing, he layers in all these details about I mean, what American life is about now, which is all about brands and things like that, right? One of the reasons I've tried to reread Salem's Lot several times over the years. I was very impressed with it when I first read it. I guess
Now,
I
was
was.
there in the book? I never read the book, but was there a lot of backstory of the Ben character when he was younger and stuff that happened in the house? Because I feel like that stuff could have been cut out of this movie too.
Well, that all that stuff about him coming back to Salem's Lot because he had this dream where he saw the Marston house that was owned apparently by a gangster who I guess they're trying to suggest he was like a pedophile or something, was abusing children. Uh, he eventually, I think the story is he hangs himself, and Ben Mears has a dream that he goes to the house and he sees the hanging corpse of this Marston guy, and that encourages him to seek the place out. It's his motivation for returning to Salem's Lot is easier to accept in the novel because Stephen King has more of an opportunity to give you his inside thoughts.
Right.
When you see it in this movie, it seems very uh, inexplicably impulsive. Why would a guy who dresses like that, who is a successful writer, why would he return to this place? He says it's because he was drawn by this house, that there's something evil in this house. And some of his dialogue, like when he's asking, I guess he's asking either Lou Ayres or Ed Flanders, he said, do you believe that a house can be evil and some stuff like that? Well, sounds very melodramatic, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like the sort of thing a modern person, especially a writer, would be saying, because then you'd be afraid if you, even if you felt that way, you'd be afraid to express that because people would think you're nuts, right? Uh, so I think they should have spent a little more time in making him a more fleshed out character and more of a person of the time, not a movie star or a TV star playing the hero of a TV show, but rather a real person with flaws, a person who's vulnerable and you know conflicted on certain things, so that he doesn't end up feeling like just sort of stock heroic character. Uh, but the other thing is uh, Stephen King's book, Barlow, the vampire, is a presentable person, right? He's a guy that you could actually introduce to people.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that when Barlow and his familiar, Stryker, come to this town, that Stryker would be saying, would be his sort of front man going around doing, you know, small work, but they would acknowledge that, yeah, there's going to be this other guy in town, this Barlow guy, and you're going to meet him. Well, they decide to turn the vampire into this horrible feral creature that you can't take anywhere and you can't introduce to anybody. He's completely inarticulate and he looks like a living corpse. So why would he be going around telling people, oh, Barlow is on his way. He's traveling now, but he's going to, why would he
Yeah.
mention him at all? I mean, if it was me and I was coming into a new town with a box containing a creature like that, I wouldn't mention it to anybody, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want people to be checking up on who the guy is, right? Which they do in this. And rather remarkably, they don't seem to find anything particularly strange about him, even though he looks like he's over 100 years old. So that is a flaw when they change the script to have this creature be so horrifying looking. They had to eliminate all that stuff where Stryker tells other people to expect this guy, that he's coming along with him. He shouldn't mention him at all because their line is going to be, his line is going to be, it's just me. It's not going to say there's another person you should be expecting. It doesn't make sense. It's a flaw in the script. The other thing that's a flaw in the script is, and a flaw in the production, is the ridiculously over elaborate interior of the house, the Marston house. It looks like it's been painted with pus and phlegm.
Yeah.
Now, why would Stryker, and I think I'm getting it, is it Stryker or Stryker?
Straker, I think.
Stryker, okay. I just want to make sure I'm not getting Straker. I'm wrong. So Stryker sounds too much like an action hero.
Yeah.
Straker, why would Straker allow the house to be in that condition? Basically, what it means is I mean, he has to present himself as a normal human being, right? He has to do
Right.
business with people in the town. First time Constable Gillespie goes to his house, knocks on the door, what's he going to do? He says, "You can't come in." I mean, that's not normal behavior. You go, "No, you can't come in," because he doesn't dare allow anybody to see what the place looks like. And why is it necessary for the place to look that way? I mean, that's just a question of letting your production designer go crazy. Do
Yeah.
whatever he pleases. Doesn't make any sense in the story. A vampire is trying to live in a town and not be noticed is not going to allow those sorts of conditions to exist. When Barnabas Collins came back to Collinwood, the first thing he did was get somebody to fix up the
Fix it
old
up. Yeah.
house. Right? So there wouldn't be any suspicion. There wouldn't be any, gee, that's an odd thing. Why would somebody want to live in a dump like that, right? Um, so that seems to me to be an error. Uh, in general, this movie would be much better if Tobe Hooper had done what he did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre and shoot in real places.
Yeah.
Because what this movie is lacking more than anything else is a feeling of realism, of verisimilitude. It doesn't, it all looks like it's shot, at least the interiors, all look like they were shot on sound stages. And they're not even particularly good sets. I mean, that set of Mark Petrie's bedroom, that's worse than what you would see in most soap operas,
Yeah.
you know? A door, and they make it even worse by shooting from places that you couldn't shoot if you were in an actual place. Like they're shooting from behind. He has like a brass rail bed, you know, with the
Yeah.
spokes, and they're shooting from behind that into the room. Well, you wouldn't be able to stand there because there'd be a wall there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing like a romantic comedy and you want to have a scene where characters go from one room to the other and you go and show the wall and the set, you've seen that in movies, right?
Yeah.
Where they track across the side of a house and it's really just a set and you can see the lines. It's like they cut the house open so you can
Yeah.
see. If you want to do that in a romantic comedy or something like that, that's fine. But in a horror movie, you really have to believe that you're in a real place. Production designer or the producer, or maybe it was Tobe Hooper, was talking in Cine Fantastique. I have their Salem's Lot issue. I got it when it first came out, so I don't know what that makes me look like. A little pathetic creature. I'm still hanging on to it after all these years. But in this issue, they have interviews with all those guys, the producer and Tobe Hooper and the production designer, the guy that designed the sets and so forth. And Tobe Hooper was saying, "Oh, wait till you see the interior of the house. It looks like a set from Gone with the Wind." Well, that's not right. You shouldn't
Yeah.
have a set that looks like Gone with the Wind. You shouldn't have a set that looks like any kind of Hollywood spectacular movie. It should be real places so that we really believe that this is a story about real people and a real vampire attacking them, right? We got too much weight to carry as it is, the story does, without adding to the problem, making it harder for the audience to believe it by shooting on these obvious sound stages that aren't not even particularly well addressed, right? The props are sort of, obvious things,
Yeah.
Speaking of his bedroom, there's that scene where his father comes to the door, and his father says something to the effect of, "Don't you think you should? Don't you think you're too old for this sort of stuff?" Right.
Right. Yeah.
Now, as a monster kid myself, who had his room decorated with all the Aurora models and everything, I certainly heard that from my father at one point. So I know where they're coming from with that scene. And I imagine Stephen King and Tobe Hooper probably had similar things when they were kids. Their parents telling them, "When are you going to put away these childish things and start acting like an adult?" Right. So that's something that you could really grab onto, and it could sort of inform that our understanding of who that character is. But instead, rather awkward thing they have with him uh, trying to demonstrate that he's an escape artist.
Yeah. With
Now,
the handcuffs and the
right.
rope.
Now, being interested in magic, that might fit in with the idea of him being a fan of movie monsters and things like that. Because back at that time in the 70s, there was a lot of interest in magic. There was a big Broadway show called The Magic Show with Doug Henning, and magic was a popular thing for a while there. It had reemerged as a popular thing. So it's conceivable that he might be interested in magic. But the only reason they're setting him up as an escape artist is because he has to get away from Straker later in
Yeah.
when he ties him up in the house. We have to have the understanding that he can escape from that in order for the story to proceed. I think that that's stupid. And it's rather awkward and weird scene where he's asking his father if he wants to tie him
Tie
up.
him up, yeah.
You know, I mean, that wouldn't be that odd in any other movie, but this is a movie where they're already talking about children being abducted or molested, and the Marston guy apparently was a child molester, or child killer, perhaps. I forget what the deal on him was. And of course, there's references to there's sort of subtle allusions to the idea that um, uh, James Mason's character Straker and Barlow might be a gay couple. You know, they're antique
Yeah.
dealers and they're moving into the town, you know, to run an antique store. So the idea of uh, them maybe being pedophiles, you know, which might have been a common assumption for some people, particularly more conservative people back at the time. That's already in the air. So it seems to me that we shouldn't have, you know, you should be careful about that type of, hate
Yeah.
that, you want to tie me up.
Yeah.
But James Mason is wonderful in this.
Oh yeah.
He's a lot of fun. James Mason, like Ed Flanders, is one of those people that you put a camera on him and they'll always find something interesting and amusing to do. And his delivery on some of some of the lines in this, even though the dialogue isn't exactly sparkling, but he manages to find something in every line, and he just puts a little twist on it that makes it sound simultaneously charming and friendly, but also menacing.
Yeah.
There's this sort of layer of sarcasm on everything that he says, which is kind of fun to hear. So he's terrific. But what I should stop talking for a moment and find out what you think. You're the one that suggested we do this.
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, I'd seen it, as a kid when it came, not when it originally came on, aired on TV, but I was seeing it a little bit after that. Like I said, I enjoy it. I think it's a good, the kid stuff was creepy as I seen it as a kid. Still kind of effective now, but in some of the scenes you can see the crane that they're sitting on that's raising them up. So kind of take, I don't know, it just felt, when I watched it this time, it felt like a made for TV movie
Yes,
to
yes.
me. Now, was it a two, like just a, when I
It's
watched it
really
was
shown in
two
two parts.
episodes, just
Right.
2 parts. I know if it was two
Yeah.
parts or three 1 hour
Yeah.
episodes.
Well, it was, as far as I can remember, it was two parts when it originally aired. And then I think they aired an edited down version in one time slot uh, some months yet later or the next year. It was also edited down even further and released to theaters in Europe.
Right.
Uh,
I know they
uh,
also had a bunch of different endings too that they put on those European versions.
they put in more, supposedly they put in some scenes of violence that weren't included in the American televised version. But from what I gather, it wasn't anything that extreme. Uh, it's just enough to make it acceptable as a theatrical film rather than a TV film, because the TV film really doesn't have anything in it at all. There's one brief shot of Ed Flanders up on the antlers when he's impaled on the antlers.
Yeah.
So that's about the extent of the gore in the film, I think. Incidentally, the woman that plays the vampire that wakes up when Ben Mears is waiting
The morgue.
in the morgue, right?
Yeah.
That's James Mason's wife, or was
Okay,
James
yeah.
Mason's wife at the time. Apparently, James Mason loved the script, and his wife loved it too, so she ended up in the film. She makes a pretty good vampire. The scene
Yeah.
of him putting the cross on her forehead and having it sizzle, that's almost an exact replica of a similar scene in Horror of Dracula, where they do that with, I guess it was Lucy when Peter Cushing finds her in the graveyard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's
I
a
love
lot.
the look of the vampire. I like the look of them.
Yeah,
That sort of grayish look that they had. I really like that.
but
It was different.
there's a uh, a problem with the idea that the vampires would look that awful so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, we could sort of understand that uh, Barlow would look awful because presumably he's been around for a long time. But right out of the box, so to speak, for them to look as weird and as evil as they do sort of creates a problem for them as vampires, right? Because people can see them coming a mile off. I mean, that's what I would guess anyway.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that vampires, one of their tools for survival is the ability to appear normal to a certain extent, right? So that they can get close to their victims.
Yeah, but
Uh,
I guess like if you think about Barlow being the main one, and these are just his henchmen, I guess they're just doing the dirty work, so they probably don't need to look normal to, you know what I'm saying, to try to sneak
well,
up on people or whatever.
but don't there doesn't seem to be any vampires that look like normal
Yeah.
people at all. The role of religion in this. I know Stephen King said in his book Dance Macabre, which I also have here. He says that he avoided sex in vampire stories, Dracula, and so forth. Usually have some sexual connotation.
Right, yeah.
He said he felt by that time the sex thing had run its course, and he wanted to eliminate that as an aspect of the story he was telling. He says he was inspired by Dracula, and he was inspired by the EC comics. And I guess if you read the novel, you can see both. There are some scenes in the book that, if they had been done properly in the movies, they would have been genuinely frightening. I think even to the most jaded viewer. But unfortunately, they never seemed to be able. They tried for a long time to make this as a feature film, and they couldn't get it off the ground. And eventually, they Warner Brothers Television, they decided to do it as a TV show.
Yeah, I
And
think originally Romero was supposed to do the movie, and when they decided to do the show, he dropped off.
well, I know John Carpenter was also
Mm-hmm.
involved. There was a whole laundry list of people that apparently they approached, and they all, for one reason or another, uh, didn't end up doing it. Interestingly, the producer of the thing, his name is, what is his name? Well, anyway, whatever his name is, he says in the Cine Fantastique interview that he went through a whole bunch of different directors looking at their movies, our movies at the time,
Right.
looking for somebody who he could, approach for Salem's Lot. And his name is Kobritz. He said that one of the films he watched was Phantasm, which he called, he said he regarded it with a shudder of disbelief. So he did not like Phantasm.
Yeah.
So that's why Mr. Coscarelli, who we mentioned in the previous episode, had been inspired by Salem's Lot to a certain extent when he was doing Phantasm 2, the idea of the characters sort of banding together and forming a team that's going to suit themselves up with weapons and go out and fight the supernatural powers. That's something he got from Salem's Lot. Although in the case of Salem's Lot, they're only arming themselves with things that would be useful against vampires, holy water and stakes and crucifixes. Whereas in the case of Phantasm 2, they have shotguns and I don't know what else they have.
Flamethrowers.
Flamethrowers and the idea of there's a long scene here of two of the characters are employed to take the box that presumably contains Barlow when he's arriving, to deliver it to the house, put it in the basement, and then to chain up and padlock the doors.
Yeah.
And it struck me when I was watching it that this is a scene we've seen many times before. The workmen, or the alternative would be thieves, who are interacting with the coffin of the vampire without realizing what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Dracula's Great Love, the Paul Naschy movie, I think it starts with the guys coming down into Dracula's crypt, and I guess they're going to steal stuff from the coffin. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, same thing. They're going into the crypt, and they're going to break into Larry Talbert's coffin to steal. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. They're given the job of delivering the boxes to the, I guess it's supposed to be an amusement park
Yeah.
or a wax museum or something. Uh, in this instance, they have put in, first of all, they really haven't developed those characters very well, I don't think.
No.
They're pretty flat, right? They're at that point in the movie, if you're going to spend time with those characters, you would think, let's make them interesting in some way, right? They keep hopping on this thing about the box moving by itself in the
And
back of
being
their
cold.
head and
Yeah.
being cold, yeah. Which I really don't know why that was put in there. Maybe a mention that, gee, it feels chilly in here. That would be enough to get the idea that the thing is exuding some sort of supernatural force.
Right.
They talk about the cold, and they never mention that again in the rest of the miniseries, right? It's never mentioned that that he exudes this sort of overwhelming coldness, right? So why bring that up? I mean,
Right.
it seems to me it would make more sense if, uh, out of curiosity or because they think it might be something they could steal, they decide to pop open the box. But at that point in the story, they don't want anybody breaking into the box. That's not the way the story is going to unfold. So why, it sort of seems like a kind of a pointless scene, frankly.
Right.
It doesn't really generate much suspense, and the characters don't really act like normal people. I mean, can you imagine delivery men behaving that way?
Yeah, I didn't understand why Barlow wanted to lock the house up. Like, was he worried that or not Barlow, his
Straker.
Straker wanted him to lock? Cause did he not want Barlow to escape? Is Barlow some kind of mindless ghoul? And I'm pretty sure he could have broke those locks if he really wanted out.
You would think so, yeah.
So that didn't really make sense.
Why would he not be available to lock the place up?
Yeah.
Why would he leave it to those guys? And you're right, they do seem to be suggesting, although again, they don't go into any detail with this, which is kind of frustrating because they have plenty of time to go into detail. They don't go into any detail about what Barlow and Straker are like when they're by themselves.
Yeah.
We have no idea what their relationship is like, right? He apparently is broken out of the box by the time Straker shows up because there's pieces of wood all over the place. So presumably he's burst out of the box. And where does he go from there? I mean, it's Straker that goes and abducts the kid,
You're right.
right? And there's another flaw. The most famous scene from this movie, the thing you hear repeated all the time, is how chilling that scene was when the kid appears floating outside the window.
That's
And it
all.
was a
Yeah.
very effective scene.
Oh yeah.
But why is he wearing pajamas?
Yeah, I don't know. You said that before, and then when I rewatched it, I was like, I have no idea because he was wearing regular street clothes when he got kidnapped, and then
Right.
so I have no idea.
And
Maybe there was a scene they cut out or something.
I think that has to be it. Yeah. But it's extraordinary continuity error, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, it's really no possible explanation that would make any sense in this movie. He's abducted when he's wearing, I guess, what a kid would normally wear, jeans and sneakers and a jacket of some kind. He's taken, wrapped in plastic, taken down and put in the basement for Barlow to feed on. And when James Mason opens the package, he's in those same clothes.
Right.
Presumably, he's never found by his parents or by the police. He appears next outside the window, floating in his pajamas. So, what possible scenario can we come up with where he would end up in his pajamas?
Pajamas. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a flaw. Well, I guess I'm saying a lot of negative things about the thing. Let me see.
Yeah, but we tend to do that. We like, oh, I really like that movie, and then you watch it, and then when you talk about it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, none of it made sense.
Well, I think like we said before, it really is a question of people as children seeing something they normally would not have seen on TV.
Yeah.
And it was shocking to them at the time. I guess it was shocking even to adults at the time. It ran in what, 1979?
79. Yeah.
So you didn't see a lot of horror stuff on TV back then.
No.
This is long before the X-Files. And the only other competition that it might have had would have been something like The Night Stalker. Now, The Night Stalker, I would say that's a really impressive TV movie that still holds up. As a vampire story, I think that's one of the best. The TV series that they did afterwards, although we all regard it with a certain fondness and affection, it's pretty silly. It's not scary at all. And apparently that was the network's decision. They said, you can't do horror. You got to make it into a comedy. So it became kind of a campy thing, you know,
Yeah.
a silly comedy. They still almost accidentally came up with a few ideas in the course of that series that were kind of memorably scary. But it wasn't, you know, the marching orders from the network was to avoid anything that's going to get us into trouble.
Right.
Right around this time, in the mid to late 70s, there was a lot of protests about violence on television, and the networks were trying to clean up their act because I guess they were afraid they would start getting regulation, you know, government regulation. So that's what pretty much killed Saturday morning cartoon shows. Remember all the great
Hmm.
cartoon shows that used to be on? Those all changed dramatically because they weren't allowed to show any kind of physical action anymore. You know, the superheroes couldn't beat up anybody. The villains couldn't really do anything villainous because it was all supposed to be kept on the level of like Sesame Street.
Right.
So that was the environment that they were working in when they did this. And I guess it's nice to see that they were able to get away with at least as much as they got away with. But I don't know. My hope is that they're doing a remake now. They're doing also a remake of The Lost Boys, which I guess
Uh,
is,
I haven't heard that one. I haven't heard
yeah,
that one yet.
I believe they are. Lost Boys and Fright Night definitely feel the influence of Salem's Lot.
Oh yeah, Fright Night. Like that's what I was thinking about. The obviously the vampire in that movie's not ugly looking like we is in this, but him and his familiar, like the way they were interact. That's what this movie needed was more interactions between the vampire and his familiar.
Yeah, I think so. I think when we look at the best vampire movies, usually the character of the vampire himself or herself is usually the character that's the most intriguing to the audience, right?
Right.
To have a character that is evil but attractive that's the sort of secret sauce of vampire movies. That's why they've been so popular over the years. But if you just had this sort of horrible looking monstrosity running around with the I always thought rather silly teeth in, you know, in front
In the
like a
front, yeah.
rabbit, uh, that's not a character that you can really do anything with. The only thing that he's effective at is popping up suddenly into the shot as he does to the fellow when he's in prison. The vampire suddenly,
Yeah.
you know, appears. That's kind of a nice shock. And that scene where he launches himself into the kitchen of the Petries
Oh
and
yeah.
lands on the floor and then sort of slowly stands up, that's kind of effective, I suppose. I mean, it's unexpected, that's for sure. But it leaves me asking, well, wait a minute. We've been watching this movie for some time by that point. Why is he suddenly taking this approach now?
Yeah.
Right? Uh, we assume that the whole point of Straker going through the trouble of setting up an antique shop, putting a sign out saying opening soon, getting all the antiques and looking them over and putting them in the right place, is to create a facade, right? That's their cover story. But if you're going to start throwing yourself through people's windows and
Yeah.
slamming their heads together, uh, that's going to be hard to explain, right? I mean, that's the other problem with this is that we really don't believe we're in a town. We don't see the sort of gradual taking over of things. We have
Right.
little hints of it, like they encounter some people that seem kind of tired and gray, you know, and I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel so tired. That sort of thing, which is, I guess, suggesting that they've been bitten and they're on their way to becoming a vampire. But we don't see enough of that. We don't see enough of how it would affect the town, right? I mean, is it possible that could you call it a town when there's only like 2 or 3 people that we see?
Yeah, I know. You
Is it
mentioned you mentioned his fangs too being just in the basically the two front teeth.
right?
But every time we see the bite wounds, they're normal
Right.
vampire. And then if Barlow just showed up after they delivered, who turned the kids into vampires?
It's yeah. There's a certain continuity problems there. Yeah.
Like I didn't know if it's I didn't know if Straker could do it or
Well, I think what they're trying to suggest is the guy that gets the first kid is Straker. He jumps up in front of him and He takes it to the basement, and by that point, Barlow is already on the loose. So he kills him, and then how would the rest of it work?
I don't know.
He
See, I
he
thought
bites him.
I didn't think Barlow was there when the first kid
Well,
got
I think that was the point of
kidnapped.
this. I think that was the point of the scene of James Mason taking the kid down, wrapped in plastic, and putting it on the table. I assume he's putting it there for Barlow.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm just not remembering it
Barlow has
correctly.
escaped. He's running amok somewhere, and he's leaving that there for him. But now, how does the brother get it? Do we remember?
When he when he comes in the window,
Oh, that's right. He comes
he
in the
lets him
window
in
and
the
he puts
window
it. So now,
in his pajamas.
right, and they can't, and in his pajamas, and they can't figure out what's wrong with him. They think it's pernicious anemia or something,
Yeah,
and he ends up expiring. And then they have a reasonably effective scene where they're burying him, and the Jeffrey Wright, is that his name? What's the name of the guy? He always reminds me of Klaus Kinski whenever I see him. I'm
yeah.
always
Jeffrey Lewis.
Jeffrey Lewis, yeah. There's a reasonably effective scene of him sort of standing over the open grave, and we gather that he's being hypnotized in some way or being called to
Yeah,
jump into the grave. That's a pretty good scene. I can see people saying, "Gee, that scared me when I saw it as a
right. Yeah,
kid."
good jump. Yeah, good jump scare.
Right. They rely, unfortunately, on a couple of occasions of this gimmick that they used to do on TV, usually before they go to a commercial, of
The freeze
freezing the
frame.
frame
Yeah,
and doing a digital zoom.
yeah,
That hurts the movie now. It would be interesting to see if somebody could go back, and I think this is maybe something they could do if they have a new version coming out. Maybe they can do this for Blu-ray release because there probably would be a market for it. Take all that footage. I know Toby Hooper isn't with us anymore, but find somebody who can go through all that footage and assemble it now and they have actual some scenes of gore and violence, so they have that as well. Assemble it now as a feature film that would be the sort of adult, intelligent thing that you would expect them to do now
yeah,
after years of X-Files and similar types of stuff on television. Now we can do something that really doesn't have all these sort of corny, borderline campy elements in it.
yeah. When I was watching it, um, without having the actual commercials, those cuts are pretty jarring.
Right. And
They
that's
just
something,
freeze frame and then cut goes to the next scene.
right.
It just seems weird when it happens.
And it also is a way of trying to get a shock, get a scare without actually showing anything that's scary, right?
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. And it gives you the impression you've seen something horrifying when you really haven't seen anything that's terribly horrifying. But um, but anyway, it would be an interesting exercise to take the footage and see if it could be turned into something that would be a little subtler and a little
Yeah.
more effective as drama.
Yeah, I think
But
I think it could have been it could have been helped out if it was like 5 1 hour episodes. They could have got a little bit more story in
well,
there.
they certainly could have gone through the whole of the original book. The book,
Yeah.
as and I guess this was the second book that Stephen King did that was popular. This is 75, I think it came out, and uh, the I guess the Carey was the
It was
one
the first
before
one,
this.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in I guess what is a 400-page book, or more than 400 pages. There's a lot of stuff that could make individual episodes, and all of it, fortunately, is actually directly connected to the vampire story. It's
Right,
not
yeah.
just superfluous stuff. See, I get the impression that they thought, well, we're trying to be faithful to the novel, so we're including this stuff, and also it serves to pad out the story. We really can't focus on the vampire stuff too much, the horror stuff, because it's a TV show. So instead, we'll do this sort of Peyton Place type stuff, with cheating husbands and all that. I find that stuff very tedious, to be honest.
Yeah, because it feels like I mean by the time Barlow actually shows up, it's over. It's just like oh, I
Yeah,
just want to see more of that.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's kind of hard when you look like that not to be kind of impressive looking, but
Right.
still, he doesn't really participate in any of the major action, right? I mean, he just sort of sits in his box until Ben Mears and the kid show up to stake him.
Stake 'em, yeah.
So I imagine from when we read about the difficulty they have with the makeup, with the fangs falling out, or contact lenses being an irritant, maybe they just couldn't have Reggie Nolder doing
Yeah,
much,
and to make up a lot, yeah.
right? So, but it also means that James Mason's character, who we assume does not have supernatural powers, suddenly develops extraordinary strength. He picks Ed Flanders up and marches
Yeah, oh
down the
yeah.
hall and sticks him on the antlers. I would think trying to force somebody's body onto a set of antlers so that the antlers actually come through their body, that require a lot of force.
No, I bet it
Uh,
would.
I don't know how he got so strong all of a sudden. Also, it leaves us wondering why it takes like 6 shots or more. I don't know how many shots were in that gun uh, before they can bring James Mason down.
Yeah, I don't know. He had to have some kind of supernatural.
Well, I guess we're supposed to accept that, even though it's not described. I guess we're supposed to accept that he did, although I don't. I think the whole point of the human familiar is that they are not supernatural creatures.
Right.
Right? That's why they can go out in the sunlight and they can deal with people as a normal human being, and they don't have to worry about being detected as being a supernatural being. So it would sort of defeat the purpose. It would reduce his utility to Barlow if he was another supernatural creature. Uh, so that doesn't make sense to me. Some of these things, I guess, it's just a question of we have to end this, right?
Yeah.
We have to find some way to kill him off. How are we going to stage this? What's the least stupid or offensive way to do it? You know? And that's what you ended up with.
Yeah, I didn't understand the antique shop because it just seemed like the town that they were in. I don't think the people that lived there could have really afford, and they even make reference to it with the woman saying, "Oh, I can't afford this right now, but I would like to get it." And I'm just like, I don't understand why they went with the antique shop.
Right.
And then I just kept thinking it kept reminding me of his later movie, Needful Things,
I haven't
which was
seen that one.
which was about a pawn shop where
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
the guy sells stuff that everybody wants that has something. I can't remember the whole plot of it, but I was just like, it just the antique shop thing seemed weird to me.
Well, the antique shop makes sense if it's the character, Barlow's character is the way Stephen King wrote him.
Right.
Doesn't make sense if the vampire is this sort of scarecrow or jack-in-the-box creature that they ended up with. As I say, I don't understand why they would go through all that trouble when the house, as soon as anybody sets foot in it, immediately they would know that something was wrong with these
Yeah.
guys. Right? So you're right that it's if they really wanted to have a successful antiques business, probably this wouldn't be the town to put it in. But the characters as Stephen King wrote them, they're not really concerned about whether or not the antique store is successful. They just want to have a cover story, right? So people might wonder, they might say, why are they opening it here? Nobody can afford those things. But it doesn't matter because they're not, presumably Barlow has resources. He doesn't need money from an antique store, but he needs a cover. He needs some reason some explanation for why he's there, who he is, and how he makes a living. Right? He doesn't do what Barnabas Collins does and just claim to be a wealthy relative from England.
Right. Yeah.
So he has to have some means of making a living, and so that's a reasonably acceptable cover story, unless you're going to give away the thing by launching yourself through people's windows, right? I mean, you shouldn't be doing both, right? You either want to set yourself up as a regular member of the community. Nothing wrong here, folks, right? Or you want to be somebody who's going to go through the town like a madman and kill everybody and turn everybody into a vampire. I would say that the first plan makes more sense. The vampire doesn't want to take over a whole town. What would be the point of that?
Right.
But what you want to do is take people off the edges, right? The folks that nobody notices. And you continue to live your life and everybody thinks you're a swell guy. And that's the way you would survive as a vampire. But you show up and you look like sort of like a hairless rat. And you're not apparently not even under the control of the familiar, the guy that's supposed to be handling you, and you're running around killing people left and right, even going so far as to go into the prison to kill the one guy that's in the cell there. that's surefire way of giving yourself away, right? Revealing who you are to the townspeople. So there's no strategy there. There's no logic to what they're doing. In Stephen King's book, it works, but in the movie, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, another thing that kind of, I don't know, maybe I zoned out towards the end, but I couldn't figure out how the Susan character got to Mexico and who was chasing them, who was looking for them, that they would look in the holy water and be like, oh, look, somebody, they found us.
Yeah, that
Like,
holy
for
water
some
thing is,
reason, that whole thing didn't make sense to me. And I was just like, why did they?
well, maybe it'll make more sense when you realize that they were hoping that this would become a TV
The
series.
TV series, yeah.
So I guess they thought, we'll give them this little alarm clock or a little alarm that would go off when the vampires are getting close, which is the holy water that starts to glow. That's not a bad idea necessarily, but it was pretty shoddy special effect
Yeah.
that they used. Uh, the characters, you could tell when you're watching the end when they're burning the house, you could tell that Susan was going to show up again, because that's the only way they would ever allow the hero to walk away from a burning house and say, well, I guess she's gone.
Yeah.
That's not the way heroes behave, right? The hero, if there was a chance, if the plot didn't require her to show up later as a vampire, he'd be charging into the house, trying to find her and trying to rescue her, regardless of the flames. So as soon as you see that, you say, okay, well, she's going to show up again. Why they go to Guatemala, that I don't understand. Uh, they're being chased by the vampires of Salem's Lot, all the way, everywhere they go, and
Yeah.
they can't stop and just tell people what's going on. They can't. There's no way to alert the authorities or the people around them that they're being pursued by these vampires. They have to go to Guatemala. I
And
mean,
I
the
believe,
book.
and I believe at that point in the movie it was what, 2 years later.
uh, Well, the book actually starts with them. I don't know if it's in Guatemala, maybe it is, but the book starts with them there, and uh, they're keeping track of the press stories about people disappearing and things
Right.
like that. And when they notice that there's activity, they go back. If I remember the book correctly, it's been a long time since I've read it. But I don't know if they have anybody coming to them, any of the vampires coming to them, because why would the vampires do that?
Yeah, no, that's why it didn't make sense when I
Yeah, we've already
pulled it together.
established in the course of the movie that they're these animal-like creatures. They don't seem to be thinking creatures. Matter of fact, Susan is the first one that acts like she's going to try to seduce
Yeah.
the victim. Uh, all the rest of them look like they're rotting corpses. So how successful would they be if they were actually out roaming around the country trying to find people, specific people? And why would they do it? Well, what's the point? They're like sharks, right? They
Yeah.
exist to feed, to find victims. Chasing after people because they got a grudge against them, that's not what they would be doing,
No.
as far as I can see. Besides, the other thing that, and this was something I was so impressed by Salem's Lot when I read it as a book, that when I saw the TV movie and I was disappointed by it, I wrote a screenplay called Children of the Night. And that was my attempt to say, this is how it should have been done.
Yeah.
And that got made into a movie in 1991, I guess. It was produced by Columbia TriStar Home Video, and it was starred Karen Black and Peter DeLuise and Garrett Morris. And it wasn't a very good movie, frankly.
Yeah, I've seen it.
You've seen it. Okay, so
Yes.
you can attest to the fact that it was not a very. I did not direct the movie. I just wrote the original screenplay. Then they went off and they made all sorts of changes, and it's quite different. But I think you can see in the movie the Salem's Lot influence is still there. That still comes through. The idea of the vampires taking over the town. Now, my premise in my original script, and I think this made it into the movie, was that somebody who isn't in the town is living with somebody who's been made into a vampire by the master vampire that has taken over that town. So he goes back to the town to find that vampire to kill him, because the idea is when you kill the master vampire, those people who've been infected by him will be
Turn back. Yeah.
go back to being a normal human being. And that was the point of my script. And I think that's also the case in the film version that I haven't watched it in years, but I think that part of it is included in the film, that the motivation for going back to the town where the vampires are is to kill the master vampire so that all these people will suddenly be freed from his control. They don't do that at all in this movie version.
No, and I thought that's what they were going to try to do. Was, that was the reason they were going to go. The main reason they go kill Barlow was
Well,
to
yes.
release everybody else.
It seems to me that that's a very valuable aspect, a very valuable tool in your storytelling, right? If you can immediately sort of put a circle around that character and say, this guy is really important, right? If we can get him, then all of our other problems are solved. If we can get him, then everybody in the town goes back to normal.
Right.
So it's a way of elevating that character and making the character really seem important. And it also gives you your MacGuffin, right? Now you have a mission. Now you have some purpose. Your characters have something they have to achieve. But in this, where I suppose we're led to believe that Barlow is destroyed, but the vampires he created are still roaming
Still
around
around, yeah.
looking for more victims and chasing people to Guatemala, which
Yeah,
doesn't
'cause
make any.
I thought when they got into the house they were going to find that Susan was turned, but then
Mhm.
they would kill Barlow and of course turn her back, which is what
Right.
they done in Fright Night. But maybe that's what I was expecting.
Right. Well, I don't really understand why she went into the house,
Yeah,
to
I
be
don't know
honest.
either.
She's following, she sees the kid go in, but why is she even there to
Then
see him
there,
go in?
yeah, I don't know.
I can understand why he wants to go in because he just saw his parents get killed by the vampire. But why did she decide to just mosey on over to the Marston house? What's her motivation? What does she hope to accomplish there?
Right.
And as it turns out, not it wasn't a good idea.
Yep. Just gets
Uh,
captured.
yeah, but that's the script needed some work, I think, and they don't have proper motivation for a lot of the characters. We also, I guess it should be mentioned, there's really no clear motivation for Barlow, right?
No.
What is he hoping to achieve? What's his motive? Is he just wants to keep feeding on whoever comes into range? Is that his whole strategy? Is his familiar is in charge of strategizing? If so, what's his strategy?
Yeah.
We don't really know. I mean,
And if you kill everybody in the town, who's going to buy your antiques?
that's right. Yes, it's bad. You should have taken a course in business administration.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of sort of clunky aspects to it, and it's surprising to see how people still are talking about it so favorably. It has a very high rating,
Yeah.
and people speak about it with real affection. So.
I mean, like I said, other than the little things we nitpick after the fact, after we watch it, when you're watching it, you're just kind of enjoying it, I guess.
Well, I suppose so. Maybe the first time, but I have to admit, when I saw it the first time, I thought it was rather dull.
Right.
And when I was watching it this time, I found it even duller, especially the first part, where it was pretty clear that none of that stuff was really going to amount to anything. And they have certain things that they do, certain things that the characters do that just don't ring true. And it's not stuff where you could say, well, that would never happen. It's just, it doesn't seem quite right. Like, for
Right. Yeah.
instance, the Ben Marston character, if I remember correctly in the book, uh, Susan approaches him, or there's some sort of interaction where he's not going out of his way and approaching people in the park and saying, that's me that wrote that book for
Yeah.
you. What would be the point of that? And it sort of goes against the grain of, if we're supposed to believe that he's there for this very strange reason, that he has these odd feelings about the house, and he's returned to try to write a book about the house to see if he can come to terms with it, to understand it better. That's kind of hard stuff to put into words, and he probably would be kind of a reclusive guy. Right?
Right.
And he seems reclusive, like when he goes to rent the room, the landlady tries to chat with him, and he seems very standoffish and very
Hmm.
abrupt. So that makes sense. But then he's going into a strange girl in the park and approaching him and identifying himself as the author of the book she's reading. Doesn't really seem, it seems like, well, we have to have these characters come together, and that's the best they could do, right? Why couldn't they have her come over to him? But anyway, Do you think I'm too critical?
No, no, I don't think you are. Yeah,
Maybe.
I can imagine. Like I know this. I know that it done really well when it was on, but I can imagine that first if it was split up into two, I guess episodes is what you would call it. It was a miniseries.
Hmm.
I can imagine that first episode not having anything in it at all. That would make you want to come back for that second part.
Well, maybe that's why I found it so boring.
Yeah,
I forget where they ended the first episode. It's but you're right. They probably ended it on this juicier detail. Oh, I know. It probably was when the kid sits up in the coffin and attacks the guy.
oh yeah, maybe yeah,
That's probably where they ended the first episode. So maybe if you saw that, you would say, well, it was pretty dull, but that last scene was good enough. So I'll come
yeah.
back and find out what
Come back,
happens.
yeah.
Uh, but and you know that, like I say, that was an effective episode. The other thing I would say with horror movies in general is that you should try to leave some space for scenes where there's silence and where you're able to sort of uh, allow the characters to sort of absorb and the audience to absorb the atmosphere of the moment.
Yeah,
That scene with him standing over the grave, that was effective because we weren't quite sure what was happening. There was a certain amount of suspense that came from just the fact that it wasn't clear exactly what was going on and how that would play out. And there was no dialogue, so there was nothing. We were completely at sea. The audience is completely left with nothing to help them judge how this is going to play out. So that's an effective scene because it doesn't have a lot of dialogue and it's not, it has a certain mystery to it. But most of the other scenes, it's people talking to each other.
yeah. There was a couple of scenes, and they were almost the same. It was when Ben would go up to the house, and he would turn around. There's Straker, and they would just sit there and stare at each other,
Yeah.
and not say anything. They done that twice, and I was like, why are they just standing there staring at each other? And there was a lot of scenes of people looking out the window at people.
Right.
It's like,
Well, Toby Hooper apparently thought that scene was very effective. He liked the fact that they didn't say anything to each other.
it
I
was just
guess
awkward.
the second time, I think James Mason says "Good evening," which was the extent of the dialogue they exchange. But yeah, I would have preferred to see more than that, and I don't really understand why wouldn't they talk.
Yeah,
I mean, what is preventing Straker? Uh, doesn't it seem more suspicious if you're standing outside somebody's house staring up at it and they come out? Doesn't it seem more suspicious if they don't say anything?
yeah,
I mean, he's sort of acknowledging, I know why you're here, right? And I don't have to say anything to you. We're not going to have a friendly little chat. We're just going to acknowledge that you know
you
what's
know what's
going
going
on
on.
here.
Yeah,
That's not the way I would play it if I were him, you know. I mean, the whole idea in a situation like that is he's not trying to appear menacing. He's not trying to appear villainous. He come out and say, "Oh, can I help you? Aren't you that Ben Mears fellow I've been hearing people talk about? Come on in and have a drink."
yeah.
Well, he
I
can't do
can't come
that
in. Yeah,
because the place is covered with snot. But that's the unfortunate situation that he finds himself in, is that even though I would assume they have a little money, they have little resources, they have a little bit of resources, they haven't fixed up a place that is presentable enough for them to convincingly portray themselves as a upstanding member of the community.
yeah.
They have to do all their business in the street, right? Uh, and I don't know. They never show us. Do they ever show us Straker's room?
I don't think so.
So he's living, a man impeccably dressed, obviously an intelligent, civilized
Unless it was
fellow.
that room that he came out of whenever he killed Ned Flanders.
I don't remember. I would say I'll go back and watch, but I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah. We'll just fast forward through it.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I'll have to do. But anyway, it just doesn't seem to me that was a smart idea. The idea should have been that these characters are trying to appear as normal as possible so that people won't be suspicious of them.
Yeah.
Intentionally behaving in a suspicious way is exactly the opposite of what you should be trying to do.
Yeah, which is kind of how Needful Things was, because it's been a while since I've seen it, but I'm pretty sure the guy that runs the antique shop is basically the devil,
Uh,
and every little thing that he sells, each person in town affects him in some weird way. I really can't remember, but yeah, that's just what it kept reminding me of.
Well, that sounds like Stephen King's EC Comics influence is
Yeah,
affecting me because they did a movie version. I guess Amicus did a movie of uh, Beyond the Door, Beyond the Grave. I think it was Beyond the Grave.
yeah,
It wasn't EC actually. It was a collection of, I think, Robert Bloch stories. Anyway, the idea was Peter Cushing, his little friendly old man, was running this uh, curiosity shop, Oddments, you know, strange objects, the art, and each person that comes in, they buy something, and that's one of the stories. What happens to them as a result of buying one of these little strange objects. So maybe that's something that Stephen King saw. Stephen King has borrowed from a lot of movies in his time. Almost every idea during his heyday, almost every idea that he had for his novels was something that you could recognize from episodes of The Twilight Zone or EC Comics or Hammer Horror or Universal Horror or some other horror movie. So he is not he's not afraid to borrow things.
right.
I always had very high regard for his ability to come up with these sort of crackerjack ideas. And I don't know if that's still true because I haven't read any of his stuff in recent years, but his ability to come up with these ideas where you say, gee, I wish I had thought of that.
Yeah, yeah. Needful Things, 1993. I guess I can recommend that. Max von Sydow plays in it. Ed
Yeah.
Harris is in it. So
Yeah, I remember when it came out, but I never got a
yeah,
chance to see it. By that point, I guess I'd written off Stephen King,
right.
but we're now in the midst of a Stephen King renaissance,
Oh
right?
yeah, yep.
It has become an enormously successful movie, and I guess they're doing Salem's Lot next with the assumption that that will also be enormously successful.
They've
So,
already redone The Stand, but they made it like a basically like another mini series on their streaming service. I started
which
watching it, I really couldn't get into it.
which streaming service is running that? Is that Netflix? Or?
It was on Paramount.
Oh, Paramount. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hadn't even heard about that one.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
probably
well,
because that's how bad it was. It was nobody really talked about it. But
well,
like
those
so,
thing.
I didn't get to watch Return to Salem's Lot again, and I don't remember a lot about it. Is it a continuation or is it completely different?
Well, to be honest, I
I
didn't
assume they
bother.
go back to Salem's Lot and get away from Mexico,
Right.
but
I don't think that the lead characters are the same characters. Michael Moriarty is playing a different character, I think, in that. Larry Cohen, who is the guy that we know from so many TV shows and movies over the years. He's the guy that created The Stuff, and he's the guy that did It's Alive, and he's the guy that did Q, the Winged Serpent, and he
right.
also wrote innumerable episodes of various TV shows, The Rifleman, and a whole bunch of other TV shows. And his movies were being made from his scripts up until I guess about 10 years ago. I think they were still making, he's like Richard Matheson. They were squeezing the last drops out of everything he wrote right up to the end. So a very clever guy, very talented guy, but he did some odd, movies over the years that aren't very good, frankly. And I don't know if he was as good a director as he was a writer. He probably should have stuck to writing.
Right.
And I just glanced at Return to Salem's Lot. Its reputation is terrible. Everybody seems to think it's awful. And from what I see, it doesn't seem, other than the idea of a town that's run by vampires or some sort of supernatural entities, it doesn't appear to be connected to what happened in Salem's Lot.
And
And
it was another miniseries, right? Or was this a movie?
I think that was just a TV movie, but I could be
Okay.
mistaken. I could be mistaken. Anyway, it's not really something that's worth bothering with.
Oh, yeah.
And from what I understand, 2004 was it that they did a remake of
The
this?
remake with
That
Rob
doesn't
Lowe.
seem, yeah, that doesn't. I can tell just by looking at the clips and on the internet that it probably is making the same mistake that the original miniseries did.
Right.
It's just fake TV looking thing. It doesn't look like, doesn't have the same. Well, we were talking. We did an episode about Let's Scare Jessica to Death a couple of months back.
Hmm.
That's the sort of feeling you should get.
Yeah.
Right? feels like it's shot in a real place. It feels like real people. It's almost like the camera just caught up with these folks, and it almost has almost like a documentary feel. Doesn't mean you have to shoot it with a handheld camera or anything like that, but it should the locations and the sets that you use should be real places, so you can get that feeling that this is a real thing that's happening. And you should also try not to go for exaggerated effects when you're doing supernatural stuff like vampires. Avoid CGI.
Yeah.
CGI is not your friend with these type of stories, because that works great for science fiction stuff, but in vampire stories or ghost stories, CGI always looks exactly like what it is, which is CGI.
Right.
It's better to do that stuff by misdirection or inference. Have it be something that's happening in the corner of your eye, so to speak. But putting some sort of elaborate CGI effect right in the center screen, as I saw in the clip I watched from the Rob Lowe miniseries, the scene of him watching the woman come back to life in the morgue, and then at some point he waves the cross at her, and she flies up into the air onto the ceiling. It's just not scary, and it's kind of undignified. It's almost comical, right?
Right, yeah.
She flies up through the ceiling, That's like something you see in a cartoon. They've been doing stuff like this now for a very long time. Obviously, Nosferatu was in the 1920s. Dracula was an early sound film in the 1930s. And vampires have been around in movie history throughout its history. In the 70s, particularly, there was a great resurgence in interest in vampire stories and Dracula. I mean, we had two Blackula movies, we had two Count Yorga movies, we had Grave of the Vampire. What else did we have? We had Frank Langella on Broadway doing Dracula, then Frank Langella doing a Universal remake.
Right.
They had another off-Broadway version of Dracula running, Passion of Dracula, right around the same time that Langella was doing Dracula on Broadway. They had Louis Jourdan doing what I still think is one of the best versions of Dracula that's ever been done for British television. I forget if it was for the BBC or one of the other British broadcasting companies. And so vampires all around. And a lot of those are damn effective. I still think, surprisingly, movies like Blackula and Count Yorga, there's some scenes in them that are very, very convincing, very shocking. Especially Count Yorga has some real effective scenes in it.
Right.
So why, with all the resources that they have when they did the original miniseries of Salem's Lot, or when they did the remake in 2004, with all the resources and all the money and all the talented people, why can't you make something that's as effective as a movie that was made on the cheap? I mean, Count Yorga started as a softcore porn film.
Right, yeah.
I mean, you can't do something as effective as that with all the resources you have. And then I realize when I say that, is that the problem is they got too much resources.
Yeah. Well, I figure with the with the remake in, what'd you say, 2004,
I guess it was
they were probably already trying to copy all of the vampire like action movies.
Yes.
That were kind of big around. I think John Carpenter's Vampires was
right
around the same time. Maybe Blade. Maybe Blade had just come out, so that's probably what they were trying to copy.
When horror movies started to be lumped in with the action genre, that's when things go wrong, I think. Everybody enjoys a good action movie, but horror movies are supposed to be something different. And if the characters are all expert in martial arts, or the touting machine guns or machetes or whatever, then they're not vulnerable, and that means that your horror, the drama that's supposed to come from these horrific situations, isn't going to be there, right? It's not going to work.
I don't know. I enjoyed John Carpenter's Vampires, and then I liked From Dusk Till Dawn. I thought that was a good.
Well, From Dusk Till Dawn is I've never seen John Carpenter's Vampires, but From Dusk Till Dawn is an entertaining film. And there are probably a few others that we can name. I mean, I would say some nice things about Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. I don't think that I particularly care for Gary Oldman's young Dracula. His old Dracula is terrific, though. It's a nice, eccentric performance that he's giving.
I think I've
Uh,
only seen it one time, and that was in the theater when I saw it in the theater when it came out. That was it. After that, I didn't have any desire to rewatch it.
well, it's not completely effective, but it has certain elements that are very impressive. The sets, the costumes, cinematography,
Right.
the in-camera special effects, uh, the music has a wonderful score. So all of those things make it worth watching, even though the acting isn't that great and it's not really the best adaptation of Dracula. But we've spoken a lot on many occasions about my feelings about what works best for either an adaptation of the original story or continuing stories with Dracula character. And I always feel that the horror element is the thing that should be emphasized.
Yeah.
I mean, if you, Vampire Lestat and Anne Rice's approach of making the characters into these sort of romantic figures, that works too, but that's a different type of thing you're doing, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be a horror thing. That's a romance with vampires, uh, and maybe a certain amount of gore and things like that. But the reason why those books and movies might be more popular than some of the other vampire movies that I've been mentioning is because people who don't like horror movies can also enjoy movies like that. They're not
Right.
really
Yeah.
hardcore horror films. Um, but I mean, it is the trick is that you got to find a character who's interesting enough and sort of seductive enough, charming enough to make the audience enjoy being in their presence. And I've always been surprised that people keep going back to the Nosferatu thing because it seems to me that that character is a dead end. It works in a very simple silent film, right? Where there's a level of stylization and abstraction that makes it possible to believe that people could confront a creature like that and expect to have a normal conversation with him.
Right. Yeah.
And they did, Werner Herzog did his remake, and that had some interesting aspects as well. But that was the thing that was always sort of standing in front of you and preventing you from really enjoying the film or really getting into the film, because it was really hard to believe that Jonathan Harker would accept this
Yeah.
creature, you know. Nosferatu in the silent film and also in Werner Herzog's version gets even worse looking as it goes along, but still he's pretty ghastly even when he's first encountered. I just don't see how the audience can get past that, you know. But I would recommend Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. I think
Oh
there's a
yeah.
lot of stuff.
Yeah. That I really enjoy it. The cinematography is really good on that one.
Yeah, it's a beautifully shot film, and I don't know what to say about the sequel that Klaus Kinski did. Vampire, what was it?
Um, I can't remember now. I just watched it the other day too. Maybe a
It's
week ago.
Vampire in Prague. Is that
So I think so. Yeah.
something
And
like
then
that, right?
it's got Nosferatu somewhere in the subtitle.
It was sort of an unofficial. Not that you would need to be official because the
All right. Yeah.
Nosferatu, but it's not an official sequel to Werner
uh,
Herzog's
right.
Nosferatu, and Klaus Kinski adopts a more human appearance in it
Yeah.
with
His
full
hair,
head of
long
hair.
hair.
Right? So, but yeah, it's a balancing act, I think, to make the character scary and dangerous, but also to make the character charming enough to appear to be able to fit into, civilized, society.
Yeah. All right.
Uh, but anyway, your impression of the film overall was that it was disappointing?
On this latest viewing, I mean, like I said, I think I was more bored with the
Mm.
beginning of it, and I don't know, it just didn't have that. It's not what I remembered, I guess. Nostalgia is not strong with this one.
Well, with all the director's cuts that are coming out now, including Star Trek: The Motion Picture that Paramount Plus is running, uh, you would think that somebody would say, "Hey, we got all this footage. Why don't we get somebody to put it together in a presentable form?" You got multiple versions of the thing. You have footage that the American audience hasn't seen,
Right.
presumably. So,
I think it was even some stuff that they shot new, like reshot stuff for the
well, the European version.
theatrical
Yeah.
version they put out over there.
Well, in that respect, they were following the sort of the tradition that Hammer Films had established, because Hammer did that with some of their films. they shot stuff for inclusion, presumably blood and breasts
Right.
for inclusion in the foreign markets. And they didn't include it in the American or the British version, but the Japanese and the Germans got to see all that good stuff.
Yep.
But I mean, in the United States, those films, and we talked about this before, some of those Dracula movies that Hammer was putting out were almost considered like kiddie matinees.
Right. Yeah.
The first one, what was it? Not Taste the Blood, but Dracula's Risen from the Grave, I think, which I think had the distinction of being the first film to receive a MPAA rating, and it got a G. So the ratings board changed quite a bit over the years. I don't think they would give it anything that begins with a bloody corpse being found in a church bell. I don't think that's a film right from that scene. They're saying
Right. Yeah.
that's not a G. We don't know
Yeah.
what it's going to be, but it ain't going to be a G. But that did seem to be, and it was also true of the comics. The Comics Code Administration, which was the organization that was created by the main comics companies, I guess Marvel and DC and Charlton and Dell. I don't know who else might have been involved, but they were afraid of government regulation, because there was that scare of comic books are harming our kids, comic books are turning our kids into juvenile delinquents or sex perverts. So they created the comics codes, and one of the things that they eliminated is you couldn't have comics that had certain words in the title, like horror, I think, was a word you couldn't use in the title.
Which was like EC Comics' whole thing.
Pretty much put them
the
out
Vault
of
of Horror. And
EC Comics closed down all their horror things, and then they started Mad Magazine, which was a black and white magazine format.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have to worry about any comics code. And Warren Publishing they followed suit. They published horror comics in black and white, but in magazine form rather than in comic book form. So they could say these weren't comic books, they were meant for adults. But anyway, I forget where I was going with that. The Comics Code Authority, they didn't want to see vampires and things like that. So for a long period, there were no supernatural creatures and monsters and things like that in the comics. And then I guess it was somewhere in the 70s where they started to allow exceptions. They said, yes, you can do like classic characters like Frankenstein and Dracula.
Right, yeah.
And Marvel took that and ran with it. They came up with Tomb of Dracula, which is actually a very good series of comics. And from Tomb of Dracula, I guess, came Blade.
Right.
And I don't know if Mobius, I guess, was
I'm not a big.
maker.
I don't know a lot about that character.
Well, I love that character when it first appeared.
I know it was a Spider-Man. I know it was a Spider-Man character, but I'm not sure when he first appeared. I don't know if it was a.
Well, up until fairly recently, I still had the first issue of Spider-Man that he was in. The plot, the way he became a vampire is pretty similar to the story that they have in the movie now that's currently in release. Spider-Man in the same issue is taking some other drug that causes him to sprout 4 more arms. So he has 6 arms. And he confronts Mobius in a wonderful cover that was done by Gil Kane, who was one of the best of the Spider-Man artists, one of the best comic artists, in my opinion. It's got Spider-Man with 6 arms and Mobius smacking him, giving him a smack, sending him flying with all his arms. And I thought that was terrific. I always thought that that character could be a terrific character, but I don't. Apparently, they didn't do it properly as a movie.
No, probably because they got Jared Leto involved.
Well, he's an easy target.
Yeah.
For another Jared that we have to hate in the world. There seems to be a lot of hateable Jareds these days. Well, I've seen him in some movies that I thought he was very good in.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know how much influence he had on the production, on the way that the style that the story was told in. But it seems to me that just from looking at the trailer and from looking at some clips, it doesn't really look like they, went in the right direction with that.
Yeah, I would say he was fine until he ruined the fan favorite Joker, and then nobody likes him now.
Yeah, that might be the reason.
Yeah.
Well,
anything before that, he was fine.
Yeah. Just leave our Joker alone.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't he supposedly trying to get to play the character again? Wasn't there another movie another sequel movie?
He had some additional scenes in the Zack Snyder version
Oh, okay,
that he
all right.
reshot.
So he's out there.
Yeah.
There's always more Jared Joker. But well, anyway. So I don't know if there's much else that we can say about Salem's
I
Lot.
don't know. Would you recommend over 3 hour long movie to somebody?
Well,
This one?
I think I would probably recommend the book more than
There you go.
any of
Okay.
the adaptions. I haven't seen the Rob Lowe version, and obviously the latest version hasn't come out yet, so we can't speak ill of it
Yeah.
just yet.
Yeah, but we will.
But yes, well, James Wan is that the name of the guy who's producing it?
I think so.
He's the guy that did Aquaman. He also did these horrible horror movies that are so popular now. Where everything is done in CGI.
Right.
What was the one? Was it Hereditary or
No. He didn't do the Hereditary. I
which
think
one?
he either done
Conjuring?
The Conjuring, I think, or the Insidious movies. I think maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, there was one that the Red Letter Media guys that were really digging into. I guess it's a fairly recent one that they said it was either the most brilliant movie that they had ever seen or the most ridiculous movie they had ever seen.
Yeah.
And they weren't quite sure if he had done that as a joke. They didn't know if the movie was meant to be taken seriously or if it was meant as a sort of parody of horror films.
Right.
I have a feeling it just was a bad movie.
Probably.
What do I know? He's where he is doing $100 million superhero movies and horror movies. And here I am, worrying about where I'm going to get my money to buy peanut butter.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, see, I don't know if I could recommend this one. Just because it's so, well, like I said, when I watched it today, I was waiting for it to be over.
right.
I just didn't enjoy it as much as I did when I was younger. I don't know why.
Well, here's another question. Do you plan to see the remake?
Oh yeah, I'm sure I will. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be on one of the streaming services that I already pay for. So,
So you're enthusiastic about that prospect? You're looking
uh,
forward to
not really. I mean,
it?
but I don't know anything about it right now. I don't know who's in it, who wrote it or anything like that. So I don't
I
know what
don't know.
direction they're going with it.
I don't know.
Are they going to have a Nosferatu type character? Are they going to have
Well, that's an interesting
are they
question.
going to have a Tom Cruise vampire?
They're in a bit of a trap because the people that saw and loved the original miniseries are going to expect a character like that.
Oh yeah.
So they're going to have something like that. And I don't know what they did in the Rob Lowe version. Do you have any idea?
I believe they still had the same.
Oh no, they didn't. They had Rutger Hauer.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So they broke the curse.
There you go.
I guess they figured they really couldn't outdo Reggie
Yeah.
Nolder character, right? So,
I guess
but
I guess what they need to, I guess before this comes out, maybe re-release the book and sell, get that sold, or maybe do a graphic novel, and then
now
they
there
can.
might have been. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but Stephen King's stuff has been exploited in so many different
Yeah, I
ways.
know.
But Rob Lowe said that Rutger Hauer was kind of an eccentric figure. Said apparently their climactic scene where the vampire is supposed to have some sort of speech. Rutger Hauer insisted on writing his own speech. I guess he was thinking of doing like a Blade Runner thing where he would
Right. Yeah.
come in at the last moment with some wonderful piece of writing. But apparently the thing that he wrote had nothing to do with the story. It was absurd, non sequiturs. So the director told him he couldn't do that. And they had to sort of force him to do the script as written. So maybe Rutger Hauer was suffering from the same problem that Bruce Willis is suffering from now.
Maybe
Couldn't remember the script, so he just tried to come up with something else.
come up with something else on his own. Yeah.
But he was a great actor. I'm sorry that he's passed. It's too bad that he sort of descended into that realm of doing cheesy things like playing in Dario Argento's Dracula. And
Yeah, I know.
he sort of became the go-to guy for cheap, cheesy horror movies.
Yeah, that's where everybody's going to though now. Everybody that I grew up watching.
Right. It's like the last stage of every Hollywood actor's career is to end up doing bad horror movies.
Bad horror movies, yep. Or just bad movies. They don't have to be
That's right.
horror.
Well, I guess we could give Bruce
Bad
Willis.
action movies or
Yeah, Bruce Willis. He never really did a lot of horror movies, right? I mean, I suppose The Sixth Sense is sort of a
probably the
supernatural thing,
yeah,
but I can't think of any other horror movies he did. So I guess that's one positive thing we can say about his career is he didn't do a lot of bad horror movies.
right, yeah.
Stuck to bad science fiction
Just
and
bad science fiction, yeah.
bad action movies. Yeah. But anyway, so I guess it's not a recommendation, but I think it is appropriate to talk about this movie after Phantasm because
Hmm.
there is that character again of the kid. You know, that's a character that we saw in Phantasm. It's a character, as I mentioned, was in Dark Shadows, and here he is again in this. And I guess you could say it's also in Lost Boys, right? There's one kid that knows that the town is being taken over by
Right,
vampires.
yeah.
Uh, and it's also in Fright Night, right?
Yep.
Fright Night, he's not really a kid, but
No,
he's
a
a
teen, yeah, a teenager,
teenager, and
high school.
he enlists the aid of the old horror movie. What is Roddy McDowell? Does he play an old horror movie star, or is a guy doing a TV
He's like a
host?
yeah, he's like a horror movie host.
Right. So,
Vincent. Peter
so
Vincent is his name.
Peter Vincent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the same idea as in here in Salem's Lot. The kid is an expert and all that stuff because he knows all about. He's watched monster movies, so he
Yeah.
knows vampires when he sees them.
See, that's one
And
thing they probably should have had more of was our main character going to him to figure out how do we stop this. You know what I'm saying? More of that.
right, there should have been a scene where he sort of says, "I got to talk to you."
Yeah,
Do you, do you,
you're an expert in this
right,
stuff.
right,
Teach me. Give me a.
right.
And they could have a whole montage of of
Plus,
sharpening stakes and
right, and they had the beginnings of it, like when he goes to see Lou Ayres, the teacher. Mark Petry's on the
on
stage,
the
right?
stage. Yeah.
So they could have done something there where his interest in monster movies and things like that could have been brought to David
Brought up.
Soul's
Yeah.
attention. So then David Soul, when he's in the midst of things, he might think that this kid may know something about it, right? I mean, it's a tricky thing with vampire movies when they're set in the current era. It's almost impossible to believe you could ever encounter somebody who doesn't know what a vampire is and
Vampires.
how to
Yeah.
kill them, hasn't seen a half a dozen Dracula movies. So that's always kind of an awkward scene, right? When the person says, I think that guy's a vampire, and the other people say, vampire? What do you mean,
Yeah. What
vampire?
is that? Yeah.
And then they say, I have to go and research. How do you kill a vampire? You know, something that any school kid could tell you with no trouble.
Yeah.
So that's okay. And I guess that was the beauty of Stephen King is he took these old ideas that really didn't work anymore, and he set them in the real world, and he made them believable. You know,
Right.
he
Yeah.
found a way to make them believable. The guy who gets credit for being, I guess, the first to really do this was Richard Matheson with I Am Legend.
Hmm.
And I think very highly of that book. But the truth is, he didn't have that additional element. He came up with very clever reasons for why the vampire outbreak was occurring. He came up with a lot of very clever stuff. Like, for instance, if I remember correctly, in his book, he explains the vampire's aversion to mirrors as it's a psychological thing. People are told that there's a vampire plague. They wake up one day as a vampire, and they just naturally assume, based on their knowledge of what vampires are like, that they should be afraid of mirrors and crosses, right? So he's trying, and of course he also, I believe in the book as well as the movie version, the Charlton Heston version, they explain that it's some sort of virus in the blood that's causing this, right? So he found reasonably believable scientific explanations for why people would be behaving the way they behave. But it's a trick when you introduce, like they do in this movie, and so I guess also true in the novel, they introduce matters of faith. You know, having that scene, for instance, in the film, where Abalo is able to take the cross out of the guy's hand. And I have to admit, I had to go back and watch that a couple of times before I figured out what they were going for. In the book, the idea is, if you don't believe, then the cross doesn't do any good for you. Right?
Yeah.
But they don't explain that in the film. They have James Mason shouting something about faith, test your faith or pit your faith against his faith or Barlow's faith. I don't know whose other faith it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the only hint that you would get that this is a test of faith. And obviously he fails. He doesn't believe it. It's similar to what Hammer did in what was it, Taste the Blood of Dracula, or how Dracula's Risen from the Grave, when there's that business where they say you have to believe in order
Believe, yeah.
for the stake to work. And the one guy who's an atheist drives the stake in, and Dracula is able to get up and pull the stake out of his chest. And that's like the one and only time that they did that in the series, so it sort of dropped in there. But this is a similar idea that you
Yeah,
have to
they done that in
believe.
Fright Night too. Whenever
Oh, is that
he's
right? Yeah.
holding the crucifix up, and of course he's not really a priest, and he doesn't really have faith. He didn't believe in it, so he's able to grab the cross and destroy it.
Right.
Anybody says it, that's what's happening. You don't
Right.
have faith. You got to have faith for it to work. So
Right. Right.
kind of describe it.
The problem with the whole crucifix and holy water idea, and you probably would agree with me on this, because I remember you saying that you never really understood the vampire version to these things. It doesn't
Right?
really
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
How do we explain why, even if you have faith, why that should matter to a vampire? That's not really clear. I think in the world as it is today, when you're writing fiction of this sort, there are some things that are just kind of hard to believe.
Yeah. I believe it was in John Carpenter's Vampires, if I remember. I haven't seen it in a while, but they kind of covered that as going to the first vampire, I guess, was Judas. And he was turned into a vampire because he betrayed Jesus or whatever. And that's why he can't. That's why he doesn't like crosses and anything religious. So I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. I guess a way to do it, but
Right, but not liking something and actually being forced
forced to
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 flee,
repel, yeah,
and the holy water thing as
have
well.
it burn your skin.
Right,
That's stuff I
that's
didn't understand.
if we were even in Bram Stoker's time, there was still enough of an acceptance of the possibility of supernatural things in everyday life.
Right.
Right? People did have religious faith, and so you could believe that there might be a supernatural being that might actually react negatively to religious icons of any faith. That sort of still works, but in the 70s in Maine, it's kind of hard to believe. So you need to do more work to make people understand that. And I think if you're going to have a key scene where the vampire takes the crucifix away from a guy because he doesn't have faith, that's something that has to be set up.
Set up, yeah. And I
So
can imagine they had an antique shop that didn't have any crucifixes in it.
that's right. You would think he would come across some crucifixes in his travels.
Yeah.
The kid, and I guess it's kind of a clever thing. The kid takes Mark Petrie when he's being visited by the Glick brother,
Yeah.
first Glick brother. He takes one of them crosses off his model kit, one of his
Right, yeah.
from a graveyard, and he uses that, which I suppose is a clever idea, but it's still. I mean, we don't know what Mark Petrie's faith is. It's possible
It
that
is, yeah.
his faith is superior to the faith of a priest.
I guess.
That must be one shitty priest.
Yeah.
And we don't get to see anything else about the priest, right? He hardly appears in the thing until it's time for him to be revealed as a loser.
Right. Well,
But
even our main character,
Ben Mears.
yeah. I mean, he's able to use the cross too that he makes with tongue depressors.
Right.
So does he have more faith than the priest also?
Yeah. doesn't really work. It's I guess sometimes some ideas strike the writer as being so clever that they can't possibly not put it in, even though it doesn't really work in the whole of the story.
Yeah.
It's like, this is so clever, I have to put it in.
It just works when you need it.
The idea of making crucifixes out of tongue depressors just must have struck somebody as being very clever. Sort of like putting holy water in the super soaker in, was it The Lost Boys?
Yeah.
Those ideas, I guess, they're just too good to keep. It's
Yeah, you have to put it in there.
Gotta fit it in. But there's really nothing about the vampires in this movie or in any of the other movies that we've been talking about that would suggest that they are even aware of religion.
Yeah.
So that doesn't seem to be a pressing concern for any of them. They just seem to be animals, monsters that are looking to feed on people. So, and I guess in Fright Night, it's interesting. You say the character says you have to have faith for that to work.
Yep.
Does that suggest if he actually had faith, it would have worked?
Yeah, because it does. It works for him later, I guess, after
Uh,
he after he
he
finds his
finds his
faith.
faith.
Yeah.
Well, that's an uplifting story.
Yeah.
Well, in Stephen King's book, Danse Macabre, he talks about how it might be Mark Petrie's character in Salem's Lot, uh, says something that strikes Stephen King as being sort of like this key idea that he's trying to put over in his horror stories, which is that death is when the monsters get you.
Right.
And that's a very grim idea, right? Stephen King's success has basically been by writing stories where good people die at the hands of horrible monsters, and there's no happy ending, right? There's no hero. I mean, there are people that behave in a heroic fashion in some of his books, but ultimately, death, is going to get us all,
Right.
and the monsters are just the means by which we end up dying. So death is the real monster, and death is the real horror that we are confronting in all these types of stories. And I suppose it's not surprising that the main one of the icons of horror, Dracula, is a guy who can never die, right? So he's a master of death, the one thing that we fear the most. He is imperturbable. He never dies.
Right.
So that's why he's so horrifying and so scary to us, and maybe also why he's so attractive to us. I just can't figure out if I was a vampire, what I would do with all that time.
Yeah, I know.
You can only binge watch so many TV
Yeah.
shows, download so much porn, but also all the things that make life worth living, the reason why we want to continue to live, are all things that stop being valuable or important once you know you're never going to die.
Yeah.
Right. So vampire's life, even though it sounds like a bullshit thing, it's like somebody saying, money can't buy happiness and all that sort of stuff. It's one of those things people who don't have money might say.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, vampire's life is not as happy as you might think. Yeah, I'd find a way to make it happy.
Oh yeah.
If I could live forever and take anybody I want, take whatever I want, I'd find a way to make myself happy. But at the same time, I could see where it would get kind of tiresome when you're
Right.
going into your second or third century.
Yeah.
So I sympathize with those vampires in our listening audience.
Right.
I feel for you.
Yeah. All right. So, where can everybody find your movies at?
Demon Resurrection, my second film, is on Tubi TV currently, and it's also a pay-per-view on Amazon Prime. It's also on Zumo TV, and it's on a couple other platforms. Should be fairly easy to find. Whatever platform you're using the most, use their search function to look for Demon Resurrection. Put it in quotes so you don't get a bunch of other movies with demon and resurrection.
Yeah.
And you should be able to find it if it's on that platform. If it isn't on your platform, on your favorite platform, then I think you should seriously consider not sticking with that platform.
Yeah.
Find some other platform that actually carries Demon Resurrection, because you should have this in your life.
Yes, like Tubi. You get
exactly.
you get the bigger kickback from Tubi, correct?
That's right. So what I would recommend people do is go to your Tubi TV and you find Demon Resurrection, and then you just sort of leave it running constantly.
There
you go. Play it over and over and over again. And make sure you watch all the commercials.
Right.
So that would be my recommendation. My first film from almost a quarter century ago was a thing called Sleepless Nights that I wrote and directed. And within the past couple of years, I've started on a project of trying to rescue this film, because it pretty much was almost on the verge of being a lost film. Nobody was really keeping track of it. It came out and it made a little bit of money for the distributor. It didn't make any money for us. And then it sort of went out of print, and I had sort of given up on it. But a couple of years ago, me and Frank Silla, who's my producing partner on Demon Resurrection, we started talking about maybe putting it out again. And I got the idea in my head that if I could get the original materials, the original footage, that I could actually re-edit the film and make it a better movie. So that's what I've been working on and off over the past couple of years. And today, just this morning, as a matter of fact, I decided it's finished.
You're
So
done with it.
it's done. Yes, I don't think I can do anything else to make it any better. And I'm afraid that my computer, which is an ancient computer, an ancient Mac, is going to die any moment. So I got to get the thing finished and get it out to the world. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to get it through to some of the streaming platforms. We're going to use Film Hub, which is a big distributor for streaming platforms.
Right.
And hopefully it'll be on Amazon probably within a couple of months, I would think, barring any sort of unexpected problem, and maybe Tubi TV as well. So Sleepless Nights, it's a vampire movie. So it's in keeping with what we're talking. If people are listening to 2 hours of us talking about Salems Lot, but in the case of Sleepless Nights, it's my attempt to do a story that would be more like Dark Shadows, the old soap opera, vampire soap opera. It isn't a new version of Dark Shadows. It's just sort of something that was inspired in my mind by Dark Shadows. So it's 25, almost 25 years old. So it's not going to look like something that was just shot. You know, it was shot all those years ago on a what was basically a consumer camcorder. So it's not going to be visually spectacular.
Right. Yeah.
But it probably looks the best now, having up-resed it to HD. It looks as good as it's ever going to look. So that'll be out soon. And I'm available. I have pages for Sleepless Nights and a page for Demon Resurrection on Facebook and on Twitter. And I also am on Facebook and Twitter under my name, William Hopkins. So, I'm out there. And how about you? Where can people find you?
You can find this show on all the major streaming platforms. Just search for us. We're on everything, even ones I don't never even heard of. And then, of course, you can find our video versions on your YouTube channel.
That's right. They will be eventually.
Will be eventually, yeah.
I have to edit them and get them up, and I'm falling behind on that. But now that Sleepless Nights is finished, there'll be a great tidal wave of video episodes. Yes,
I'm looking forward to those.
So,
and of course, you can get our merch on our TeePublic store.
That's right. So everybody should have a podcast from beneath T-shirt. And what else? What else can they get? Hats and things?
No, they don't have hats. I don't know why they don't have hats, but they got T-shirts and hoodies and sweatshirts and coffee mugs and notebooks, pillows, pretty much anything else in there you want.
I don't see any coffee mug there. What's wrong?
I don't have one yet.
They're very expensive. You should tell them. So we expect other people to buy it. We don't buy it for ourselves.
Yeah, other people need to buy it.
We don't have that kind of budget.
Yeah.
But you would think that when you set up those things that they would give you a free sample.
Free samples to say, here, use
so you
this
can promote it.
Yeah, use this to promote, but they don't. Yeah. You have to buy it. All the T-shirts that I have of ours, I've bought myself. So.
Oh well.
But
you get a little discount at least, right?
Well, yeah, technically, because whenever I purchase it, I basically get paid for making the sale, so I get that money back anyways.
So you get a little bit of a rebate or refund on the enormous marked up price.
Markup, yeah, I do.
God bless America.
That's right.
Entrepreneurial verve.
Yeah. All right, well, this was a fun episode, and looking forward to this again. And until next week, we'll continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.